So this is about a quick recap on the first chapter of your Edexcel Physics IGCSE, which is forces and motion. These are some of the summary notes that I would like to share. Now, we also talked about in the first place that speed is defined as the distance traveled per unit time. And if the speed is something, like if the speed of something is changing, which means it is accelerating. You can change in speed is known as acceleration. Moreover, the acceleration of free fall near to the earth is constant और हमने एक average speed का formula पढ़ा था which is total distance divided by total time. Velocity is the speed in a given direction. Acceleration is the change in velocity per unit time. Then the formula of acceleration is as follows, which is change in velocity divided by the time taken. You subtract final velocity and initial velocity per unit time. फिर आपके पास एक equation of motion आती है, which is v square is equal to u square plus 2as. And we also know that the distance is measured in meters, time is measured in seconds, and speed and velocity in meter per second, and the acceleration is measured in meter per second square. Here we have two types of graph. In distance time graph, we know that the gradient is velocity and a negative gradient is returning back to the starting point. Whereas a horizontal line means it is stationary, and if the distance is zero, it is back at the starting point. And a curved line means that the velocity is changing and it is actually accelerating. In a velocity time talk, we talked about that the gradient is acceleration. A negative gradient would mean negative acceleration, or we also use the term deceleration. If the speed is zero, yeah, agar मैं कहूँ that the speed is at rest, well, again, a horizontal line means constant speed. The area under the line is the distance traveled, and a curved line means that the acceleration is changing. Forces, movement, shape, and momentum was the second part of forces in motion. We talked about differences between vectors and scalar. A vector has magnitude and direction, whereas a scalar has just a magnitude. Some of the example of scalar quantities we talked about was distance, speed, time, and energy, whereas different vectors जो हमने discuss किए थे वो थे displacement, velocity, acceleration, and force. Effects of forces क्या होते हैं, that what can force actually cause, क्या क्या changes cause कर सकते हैं. Force can change the speed, shape, or direction of a body, and they are measured in newtons. Now, there are various types of forces, for example, gravitational force, electrostatic force, and we also know that a type of force is friction है. For example, is a force between two surfaces जब वो contact में होती है, which impedes motion. Impedes means जैसे कि आप oppose कर रहे हैं उसको, against the motion, and also results in heating. Air resistance is also a form of friction. The only difference is कि उसका medium air है. To find the resultant of two or more forces acting along the same line, they should be added together if in the same direction, and they should be subtracted if they are in the opposite direction. Now, Newton's first law states that an object has a constant velocity unless acted on by a resultant force. Newton's second law states that a force is equal to mass into acceleration. ये आपके पास एक second law of Newton है, और ये famous formula बार बार use होगा, repeatedly asked in paper, which is F is equal to ma. Newton's third law states that every action has, now this is a very important part where all the three laws of Newton are actually listed. This will be shared to you today as well in the group. Now, Newton's third law states that every action force has an equal and opposite reaction force. For example, the force of the Earth's gravity on an object is equal and opposite to the force of the object's gravity on the Earth. Now, mass is a measure of how much matter is in an object, measured in kilograms. Or weight क्या है? Weight was a force. हम ये कहते हैं that mass and weight is the same thing. No, mass is a measure of how much matter is in an object, which is measured in kg, and weight is a gravitational force. So एक formula आपके पास था, W is equal to mg, and the gravitational field strength on Earth is 10 Newton per kg. The weight of an object acts through its center of gravity. For example, motion of a falling in a uniform gravitational field. Initially क्या होगा कि आपका जो free falling body का motion था, a whole explanation which is asked by the examiner as well. ये कौन सा free falling body motion? Initially there is no air resistance, and only force acting on it is weight. As it falls, it accelerates but increases its speed and hence air resistance. This causes the resultant force downwards to decrease. Therefore, the acceleration decreases. So it is not speeding up as quickly. Because now the air resistance is also acting upwards. Weight less है, air resistance ज़्यादा है. So upward force is greater, hence the resultant force decrease करती है, acceleration भी decrease करती है. Eventually, there are equal and opposite and balance. So there is no resultant force. Then there comes a point of forces balance हो जाती है, and we call it as a zero resultant. So there is no acceleration and the terminal velocity is reached. Here you can see in the three diagrams कि शुरू में there is no air resistance, only gravitational force. In diagram B we have a little air resistance, more gravity, या मतलब कि more weight. In diagram C both, अब क्या है, again we have a little more air resistance, still the overall resultant is downward. लेकिन यहाँ पे the forces become balanced, 833 and it has a constant velocity. फिर हमारे पास एक चीज आती है स्टॉपिंग डिस्टेंस के ऊपर हमने डिस्कशन की थी. When a driver notices a hazard, the distance traveled in the time between the driver realizing he needs to brake and actually pressing the brakes is called the thinking distance. Now, factors which increase the thinking distance include greater speed, slower reaction time due to alcohol, tiredness, or distractions. Reaction time can also be increased by caffeine, which reduces the thinking distance. The distance traveled in the time between pressing the brakes and the vehicle coming to a stop is called the braking distance. Factors which increase the stopping distance include greater speed or mass, poor road conditions, whether they are wet or icy, car conditions, worn out tire, worn brake pads, and the stopping distance is the sum of both the thinking distance and the braking distance. Now, a force may produce a change in size and shape of a body. We call it deformation. जब भी force की वजह से कोई चीज size और shape change कर जाती है. Now, elastic deformation is when the object returns to its original shape when the load has been removed. An example of being a spring being stretched under normal uses is also an example of deformation. फिर हमने एक चीज डिस्कस की थी Hooke's law. Hooke's law states that for a spring F is equal to kx, where F is the force applied to the spring, k is the spring constant, and x is the extension. फिर हमने linear और non-linear graph को discuss किया था. That linear obeys the Hooke's law, non-linear graph does not obey the Hooke's law. Moment of a force को हमने स्टडी किया था, in which the formula is force into perpendicular distance from the pivot. An object is in equilibrium when the sum of clockwise moments equals to the sum of anti-clockwise moments according to the principle of moments when there is no resultant force. Then the next concept was about momentum. Momentum क्या होता है? Mass, product of mass and velocity. It is measured in kilograms meter per second. The force exerted on an object is equal to its change in momentum over time. The force की हमने एक और definition को study किया, which is rate of change of momentum. Now, safety features in cars work by increasing the time taken for the people in the car to come to a rest. इसको हम change in momentum भी कहते हैं. For example, airbags या seat belts. In a collision, the total momentum before is equal to the total momentum afterwards, known as the principle of the conservation of momentum. For example, a question here, 10 kg stationary gun is loaded with a 0.01 kg bullet. It is fired with the bullet traveling at 100 meters per second. What is the recoil speed of the gun? Total momentum before क्या था? 0. Total momentum afterwards क्या हो जाएगा? 0.01 जो आपका mass है of the bullet. Total momentum before was 0. Total momentum afterwards क्या था? 0.01 mass of the bullet into the speed which is 100 plus 10v. 10v हमने इसलिए किया था because it was a 10 kg stationary gun and आपके पास velocity क्या आ गई थी? minus 0.1. So the recoil speed is 0.1 and minus 0.1 का क्या मतलब? Because we know velocity is a vector, तो हम इसका magnitude की बात करते हैं as if we are finding the speed. And this is the end of your forces in the motion chapter. A quick summary overall by these given notes.